Wow, have you noticed how many buttonholes you have built into this machine? Across the top on row 1, you have 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28 is an eyelet, and then down here at 0, that's your standard one, so it's right at your fingertips. These are all specialty buttonholes. Let's go ahead and take a look how you go about setting up for a buttonhole. First thing you want to do is go ahead and take your button and measure it. Down here along the millimeter section, you notice there's a dotted circle. Place your button right at the 0 and then notice what it measures out to. This one goes to about 15 millimeters. We've already picked our buttonhole. We're doing 0 here, which is row 1, 0, 0. Now we need to actually take a look at the foot that it recommends. This foot is actually the one with the sensor or the red wheel that's going to plug into the side of the machine. Now before I put this on, I want you to look on this side. The red wheel actually has a white crown and the little white mark at the top. The machine will remind you, if you don't do it automatically, to move this to the white crown part, so it's on top, before you start sewing. So even though you might move it now, as soon as you put your fabric in, it might move it. So just kind of keep that in mind. Before you sew, the last thing you do is move that into position. All right, let me show you where this is going to plug in. I always put the presser foot on first. So we're going to go ahead and attach it just like normal. And then this part here goes up underneath, just behind your light. Now once you maybe tip your head underneath that once or twice, you can feel for it. The key is that you need to actually make sure that when you push it up, you need to make sure that it clicks. So give it a good little push, because if you don't and you start doing a buttonhole, you get what I call runaway buttonholes. They just keep stitching and they never result into anything. So just make sure that you give it a good little push. You should feel like that little click, kind of like plugging headphones into an item these days. All right, last thing we can go ahead and do is notice the white crown over here on this side and get it set up. Back on this part of our machine, what we can do is we needed a buttonhole that's 15 millimeters. 16 is kind of the default setting, so all we need to do is arrow down to get to 15. So you'll have any of the range of length of buttonholes that you need. But once you tell the machine what size you want, you are not going to have to do anything. Sometimes I even tell my students to put their hands in their lap so they don't actually touch the fabric, because it's going to do it all for them. Last thing I'm going to do, I've slid my fabric underneath and it moved my red wheel, so the white crown is back to the top. First buttonhole, I always recommend just do it on sample fabric, like what you're going to actually sew on for your project, but start in the middle, because if you're not used to it, this buttonhole is going to go backwards and you don't want to be right at the edge of your fabric and then realize that. So I always say first one in the middle of your fabric. Just go ahead and step on the foot control. Your foot will lower, and I'll walk you through the steps. First thing it's going to do is stitch backwards. Then it's going to satin stitch back towards me over that straight stitch. Next it'll stitch backwards again, do the tack at the top, and then stitch forward. All you need to do is keep your foot on the foot control for the whole entire buttonhole. It's going to do the tack at the bottom, some locking stitches, and it is set to automatically cut and lift for you. So all you need to do is pull that out and admire your perfect buttonhole. Now there are some other buttonholes in here, so let's go ahead and let's do one of the keyhole buttonholes. That's number 25. And I'll just let it be the normal 16 millimeters. So again, we'll just go ahead and let it start. It'll start stitching backwards. But this time, keyhole buttonholes are kind of nice for your coats with the shanked buttons. You need some place for that big shank to actually sit, versus just kind of hanging out into a corner here. There's not enough room. But once you give your buttonhole kind of an area, it can hang out there nicely. Great. That is a keyhole buttonhole. So that would normally be done here, and then again the shank of the button will sit here when it's buttoned onto the fabric. Now we're going to show you a couple more buttonholes. One is going to be a manual buttonhole, which you're going to use your regular foot. See, did you notice you actually had two buttonhole feet? This is the same foot but without the red wheel. Okay, So, and some of your buttonholes are going to require this one. So I'll show you how you tell the machine how long to make it. Also a corded buttonhole. So you can actually have a little bit more of a raised look and more secure so it doesn't get stretched out look. Okay, we'll do those next. So a regular buttonhole, 0, calls for the automatic buttonhole foot. But if we go to stitch number 23, notice that the foot on the screen looks different. So this was the one that does the automatic one. This is the one we're going to use next. This is where you will need to use the reverse button. See that little picture that indicates that you're going to touch it. It's also going to start at the end, and so you might say backwards first. So let me show you how we mark our fabric. So I've just drawn 2 lines. I want a buttonhole between those. That's marked out to the exact length that I need. I'm going to start on this one. It's going to sew back and forward and back. So we know exactly where it's going to start. I'm going to lower the presser foot down and up a little bit so I can move that into position. Now I'm going to need to go ahead and be watching where I'm stitching. So this is kind of a stretch buttonhole. This is number 23. Great for knit fabrics. Not as heavy, has a little give to it. So as I stitch back and I get to the line that I've marked, okay, now what I can do is I'll touch the reverse button 1 time. So that tells the machine how long we needed it to be. Now I'll do the tack at the top, and it'll do the return side. So this is doing the right side coming towards me. Again, it doesn't know where we started, so when I get to the line, I'm going to go ahead and touch the reverse button again. It's going to go ahead and do my tack, my bar tack at the bottom, some locking stitches, and it will cut the thread for me and lift the foot. And that is how you do a manual buttonhole. Now for a corded buttonhole. This really is a neat thing to do. Notice that the feet that are for the buttonhole feet have this little nub on the back side. This part is where you can take cord. We're going to divide it in half, and we'll be hooking it over the back little kind of holder there. And I'm going to go ahead, and this time we're just going to do a standard buttonhole, but without the automatic feature here. So I'm going to just go ahead and stitch. So it's going to go ahead and stitch back, but it's guiding this little cord through the buttonhole, so no part of it is getting stitched over. When I want the length that I want, let's just go ahead and call that good. Tack, and then the satin stitch towards me here. I almost don't even have to hold it, but I seem to always want to. And we're back to where we started, little reverse button here. It will do the bar tack, the lock, the cut, and the lift. Now what we have here is the cord can easily be pulled through until it disappears at the top, and then we trim it. Look how perfect that sets up. Has a little bit of a raised look. It's very, very secure. Just go ahead and cut as close as you can to the stitching. Give it a little pull if any of that cord is sticking out. And I know you can't probably see it as much, but I can feel it. It really has a nice finish to that buttonhole. So some of your buttonholes on the fabric that you tell it you're using will actually tell you to cord the buttonhole.